He found her in a sack behind his sewing shop, barely breathing, too small to survive. But what no one expected was that this leopard would grow up thinking she was human. She wore scarves, sat at the dinner table, even waited for her turn to brush her teeth. But when the authorities came for her, what happened next changed everything. Before we begin, if stories like this move you, just tap subscribe. It's free, and it helps us keep telling the ones no one else will. The days in Redridge bled into each other, hot and windless, with the kind of silence that made a man hear his own regrets. The town was forgotten, a grid of dusty lanes, collapsed fences, and power lines that buzzed like restless wasps. People here lived in half-finished houses and whispered more than they spoke. The world had moved on. Only those with nowhere left to go remained behind. One of them was Daniel Hart. A tailor, mid-40s, face etched with quiet grief, he lived in a narrow house behind his shop, surrounded by moth-eaten suits and silence. His fingers still stitched as skillfully as they had 20 years ago, but now they stitched more to keep his hands from trembling than to fill orders. His wife, Marianne, had passed 2 winters ago, an aneurysm, sudden and cruel. She had loved the color teal and left behind a closet full of blankets she never got to use. He hadn't touched her side of the bed since. Daniel lived slow. He made tea every morning. He turned off all the lights before bed. He talked to no one. The town knew him as that man with the sewing machine, but few knew his name. Until that one night. It was just past midnight. A warm wind was curling under the doorframes, and Daniel was finishing the last button on a jacket that no one would pick up. That's when he heard it, a scraping, weak and rhythmic, like fingernails across a wooden step. Then a sharp thump. He froze. Another thump. Then silence. He stepped out the back door and saw nothing. The alley was lit only by the flickering yellow bulb above his door, casting shadows over the cracked cement. But just as he turned to go back in, he saw it, a burlap sack, near the trash bins, gently rising and falling as if breathing. Cautiously, he untied it. Inside was a creature so frail, so heartbreakingly small, it took him a moment to register what it was. Not a dog. Not a cat. A leopard cub. Barely a month old, with matted fur, sunken eyes, and a whimper so faint it was like wind through reeds. Someone had dumped her like garbage. He didn't call the wildlife center. He didn't shout or panic. He did something stranger. He whispered, "You're not dying tonight." And he lifted her, carefully, like silk, from the sack, and brought her inside. Daniel didn't have children. He and Marianne had tried once. It ended in heartbreak and a hospital bed. But that night, as he pulled out the softest blanket from her untouched linen closet, still smelling faintly of lavender, he wrapped the cub in it the way a father might swaddle a newborn. She shivered, then stilled, her tiny head falling against his chest. He stayed up all night. She never made a sound. By morning, he had given her a name, Surrey. Short, soft, easy to say in whispers. He filled a dropper with warm goat milk and sat cross-legged on the floor beside her blanket. She didn't drink at first, just stared at him with cloudy, distrustful eyes. But he was patient. He talked softly as he stitched. Played old records low in the background. Let her come to him. By the 3rd day, she drank on her own. By the end of the first week, she followed him from room to room, dragging the blanket behind her like a talisman. Her presence changed everything. Daniel began talking more. To her. To himself. He started opening the curtains in the morning. Made full breakfasts instead of toast. He would sit on the floor beside her and read aloud from the newspaper, not because she understood, but because the sound of his own voice reminded him he was still alive. One morning, he caught her watching him in the mirror. He was shaving. She sat behind him, tail curled neatly, eyes fixed on his reflection. When he moved the razor down his cheek, she tilted her head. When he rinsed and combed his hair, she padded up and stood on her hind legs, reaching one paw toward the comb. He paused, then slowly offered it to her. She held it awkwardly between her teeth, then tapped it against her shoulder. It was clumsy. But it was intentional. That night, he left the comb on the floor by the mirror. The next morning, she was there, combing herself with exaggerated motions, mimicking his routine with startling accuracy. He laughed for the first time in over a year. Not because it was funny. Because it was impossible. And yet happening. By now, she was stronger. Her belly was round, her fur cleaner. Daniel made her a small padded bed beside his sewing table, but she preferred to curl in the open laundry basket, her blanket always close. One day, while Daniel was adjusting the hem on an old coat, he heard the unmistakable sound of cutlery clinking. He turned to find Suri at the table, front paws on the chair, face hovering over his half-eaten eggs. He raised a brow. "Hungry?" she chirped. He placed a spoon gently in front of her. She sniffed. Then, miraculously, used one paw to push it toward her face, and licked it, slowly and precisely, like she'd seen him do. She didn't behave like a pet. She didn't seek affection for its own sake. She watched. She imitated. She learned. Weeks turned into months. The townspeople whispered. "He's keeping a leopard inside," one boy said after spying her through a cracked curtain. "She wears a scarf," another gasped. "He's teaching her to sit at the table." No one believed it fully. But they stopped coming to the shop. Parents crossed the street with their children. He became the man with the wild thing. Daniel didn't care. Suri became his world. She had a routine. In the morning, she waited for him to dress. He'd say, "Tie day," and she'd paw at the hanger. He had once sewn a tiny vest from an old suit just for fun, and she wore it proudly, like armor. She walked beside him through the house, tail raised, dignity intact. She liked toast crusts. She liked tea with too much sugar. She sat on the couch, paws tucked neatly, watching cooking shows and old documentaries. She had learned to open drawers, to pull tissues and wipe her mouth. Once, after sneezing, she turned toward the box and pressed her nose into the tissue with uncanny intention. But all the while, something deeper was changing. Her reflection in the mirror didn't scare her anymore. She would sit in front of it for long stretches, combing herself, then simply watching, as if trying to figure something out. She knew she wasn't quite like Daniel. But she also didn't behave like what she was meant to be. A wild leopard. She existed in between. Not quite animal. Not quite human. Something else. Something quietly tragic. One evening, as thunder rolled far in the distance, Daniel sat on the porch with a glass of water, watching her nuzzle into the blanket like always. She looked up at him. "You don't know what you are, do you?" Suri blinked slowly. He didn't expect an answer. But in her gaze there was a kind of sadness. As if she could sense it too, that the world outside would never let this continue. That somewhere, sometime soon, someone would come. And they'd decide what she was supposed to be. The mornings had a rhythm now. Sunlight leaked through gauzy curtains. The kettle shrieked. The mirror waited. And so did Suri. She sat there, just as she had every day for the last 6 weeks, her reflection staring back at her while Daniel combed his hair. The comb was plastic, yellowed at the tips, and she used a matching one. Sometimes awkwardly, sometimes with startling precision. Her paw would move through the fur on her neck, her eyes narrowing in concentration, as if grooming wasn't instinct anymore, it was choice. A ritual. Daniel never corrected her. He never told her to stop. He only adjusted the collar of her vest, patted her side gently, and said, "Sharp as ever, Miss Suri." She would lick her lips slowly, turn from the mirror, and trot to the breakfast table. The table was theirs now, 2 placemats, 2 mugs. She didn't sit like an animal. She perched, regal and straight-backed, as if dinner manners had been born with her. At first, Daniel had hesitated. Feeding a leopard at the table felt like crossing a line he wasn't supposed to see. But she had made the decision for him. She didn't beg. She waited. He placed a small saucer in front of her, the way he would for a child, soft boiled egg, toast crusts, banana slices drizzled with honey. She never devoured. She nibbled. She even dabbed her mouth with tissues, mimicking Daniel's slow patting after each sip of tea. It wasn't just impressive. It was eerie. She had stopped growling. She purred now, more like a hum that came from deep within her ribs, a comfort sound. The wildness in her gait had softened. Her strides were deliberate. Her tail would loop neatly around chair legs as she passed. And her expression, those golden eyes, held questions. Sometimes Daniel would catch her watching him through the window's reflection while he ironed. Not curiously, not fearfully. Thoughtfully. Like someone studying their own kind from behind glass. The town didn't see all this. They saw a man who spoke less and a leopard who was never seen outside anymore. People whispered. Some said he had lost his mind. Others said the leopard was cursed. But a boy named Ellis, 12, shy, and often alone, saw something else. He lived 2 houses down. His father drank and his mother worked double shifts at the filling station. One afternoon, while riding his bike through the alley, Ellis paused behind Daniel's house and peeked through the slats of the wooden fence. And what he saw made him drop his bike. A leopard, wearing a pale blue scarf, sitting in front of a mirror and combing her fur. Ellis didn't tell anyone. But the next day, he left a gift on Daniel's doorstep, a folded paper drawing of Surrey, sitting in a chair, holding a spoon. Daniel found it, looked around, smiled faintly, and tucked it into the picture frame of his late wife. It was Daniel's idea to dress her on Sundays. She didn't need clothes, of course. But she seemed to understand the symbolism. He would take out a little bow tie he had stitched from an old silk tie, clip it near her neck, and say, "You're my best company, Surrey." She would circle him once, then nudge her head under his hand for the usual ear scratch. They didn't go to church. People would have panicked, but they shared the ritual. After Sunday breakfast, they sat on the porch and listened to the world wake up. Sometimes Daniel read from the old photo album, showing her pictures of his wife in her garden, photos of birthday parties, laughter caught in yellowed film. Surrey would stare at each photo, leaning closer with small, short breaths. When Daniel turned the page, she touched the corner gently with her paw. She loved animals, he once told her. She would have loved you. That night, something changed. It was late. Daniel had fallen asleep in the armchair, book still open across his chest. The fan creaked softly in the corner. Surrey was curled nearby, her tail wrapped around her legs, her head nestled in the very blanket he'd first wrapped her in. A distant bang broke the stillness. Not thunder. A door slamming, or maybe a firework. She bolted upright. Ears flattened. Daniel stirred. "It's nothing, girl," he muttered. But she didn't settle. She stood, moved to the door, and sat rigidly, watching. Then came another knock. This one real. Human. 3 sharp raps. Daniel opened the door cautiously. A man stood on the porch. Tall, squared shoulders, green ranger's vest. A rifle strapped to his back, not raised, not threatening, but present. "Evening," he said. "I'm Ranger Colton. Mind if I ask you a few questions?" Colton didn't come in swinging threats. He was calm. Methodical. The kind of man who'd seen too many animals locked in the wrong cages, and too many humans who meant well but did wrong. "We got a call. Said there was a wild animal living in residential boundaries. You aware of that?" Daniel didn't flinch. "She's not wild anymore." Colton raised an eyebrow. "That's not how it works, sir. She was dying in a sack behind my shop. She would have never made it. I didn't plan this." Colton stepped closer to the door and peered inside. And there she was, Surrey, sitting quietly on the rug, watching him. Her bow tie still on. Her ears forward. "She eats off spoons," Daniel said. "She wipes her mouth. She combs her fur. She doesn't know how to be anything else anymore." Colton didn't answer. He just stood there, stunned. Because what he saw didn't match any protocol he knew. They gave Daniel a week. A week to prepare. A week to say goodbye. You can't raise a leopard like a person, Colton had said. She'll never be safe. Not to others. Not even to herself. Daniel had nodded. But in his heart, he knew Surrey had already crossed the point of no return. He spent that week giving her everything. They had full breakfasts, movie nights, picnics in the backyard. She wore every scarf he'd made for her. He showed her old cartoons, and she'd watch, head tilting at the sounds. On the last night, he cooked her favorite, roast chicken with honey glaze. She sat with perfect posture, waiting for him to break the leg and place it gently in her dish. Then, like always, she dabbed her mouth with a tissue. He laughed, cried, and whispered, "You'll never be just a leopard." The next morning, the truck came. Colton and 2 handlers. They brought a tranquilizer, not to hurt her, just to keep her calm. But when they stepped inside, Surrey didn't run. She walked up to Daniel and sat at his feet. As they approached, she turned to look at them, then back at Daniel. And her eyes said something no words could. "I trust you." The dart landed gently in her flank. Her eyes blinked. She wobbled. Daniel knelt, pulled her close, and whispered the same words he had whispered on the night she arrived in a burlap sack. "You're safe. You're home." And then she went still in his arms. They lifted her into the crate. The scarf was still around her neck. The crate was cold steel. Sterile. Unforgiving. Surrey lay curled within it, unconscious but not peaceful, as the truck rumbled away from Reedridge. A sheet of plexiglass separated her from the ranger in the passenger seat, but it didn't stop the sound of her breathing, slow, too slow, from haunting the cabin. Ranger Colton sat stiffly, hands gripping his knees. He had seen thousands of rescues, confiscations, and releases. But never this. Never a leopard with a bow tie. Behind him, Daniel stood on the cracked porch alone, watching the dust settle. The blanket she once dragged everywhere lay limp in his arms. The wildlife facility was located 3 hours east, nestled against the edge of a semi-protected reserve. It wasn't a zoo. It wasn't a prison. But it wasn't a home either. They called it the Rewilding Unit. The idea was noble: take creatures who had been abandoned, orphaned, or illegally kept and prepare them for a return to the wild. It worked, sometimes. But no one had ever brought in a leopard who preferred soft chairs and wiped her mouth after meals. When Surrey woke up, her first instinct wasn't to growl or thrash. It was to stand. To look for the mirror. To wait for Daniel's voice. He wasn't there. Instead, a wall of chain link and cement. Sounds of distant predators. Strange smells, raw meat, urine, musk. No tea. No linen. No soft-spoken voice saying, "Sharp as ever, Miss Surrey." She paced for hours. Not wildly. Not panicked. Just lost. When the staff brought her food, chunks of goat meat tossed from a safe hatch, she nudged it aside. When they gave her straw to nest in, she pushed it toward the door. When they left a log and rope toy, she sniffed it once and ignored it. For 3 days she didn't eat. Ranger Colton returned on the 4th day. "She won't adapt," one of the handlers said. "She doesn't behave like anything we've seen." Colton stepped to the glass. Surrey was lying perfectly still, paws crossed, staring at the empty corner of her enclosure. He noticed something odd. Her head made slight, repetitive tilts, the same way Daniel's did when threading a needle. It wasn't instinct. It was imitation. They installed a camera. The footage shocked everyone. In the mornings, Surrey stood in front of the glass panel in her enclosure and mimicked Daniel's entire grooming routine. She picked up a branch and ran it along her fur like a comb. She dipped it in water and repeated. Then, she pawed at a metal dish like a mirror, staring, tilting, blinking, then retreating to her corner. Her face carried a hollow kind of memory. Not feral. Not tame. Just stranded. They tried introducing her to another leopard, a younger male named Rocco. Rocco was aggressive, dominant. Surrey didn't fight back. She didn't play. She simply watched him from the far side, then sat down, tail curled neatly, as if trying to remember what she was supposed to do. The staff wrote reports. Unresponsive to natural stimulation. Mimics human behavior with surprising clarity. Possible imprinting. Unclear if she can integrate. They played videos of wild leopards hunting on a screen near her habitat. She ignored them. But when a junior keeper accidentally left a video of a human brushing their hair playing on a loop, Surrey walked over and watched it for 20 straight minutes. Back in Reed Ridge, Daniel's house felt like a crime scene. The blanket was still folded on the armrest. Her comb sat on the sink, untouched. Her scarf hung limp on the coat rack. And Daniel, he moved through it all like a ghost. He didn't sew. He didn't clean. He watched the door. He kept a VHS camcorder by the window, waiting for word. None came. Until the letter. A white envelope. Government seal. Inside, a single printed page with stamped signature. Subject remains behaviorally compromised. Social reintroduction unsuccessful. Candidate flagged for long-term captivity or humane release. Humane release. It meant one thing: she would be set loose, alone, or euthanized if judge. Too maladapted. Daniel read the sentence 5 times. Then once more out loud. Euthanized. He didn't wait. He packed his satchel, grabbed her favorite blanket, the comb, and a letter of his own. It wasn't written to the Rangers. It was written to her. The next morning, he arrived at the facility. The receptionist blinked, surprised. "You're not supposed to be here without appointment." "She remembers me," he said quietly. "You don't understand. She's not confused. She's been trained to love. You don't untrain that." Colton came to the front after a few minutes. His face had changed since their last meeting, less rigid. Troubled. "She's not doing well," Colton admitted. "Then let me see her," Daniel said. "Not as a trainer. Not as an owner. As family." With heavy debate, the board agreed to a supervised visit. Inside the neutral enclosure, they brought Surrey in from a side gate. She stepped out slowly, her eyes scanning the room. Then, her body stiffened. Daniel stood 10 feet away, holding the blanket. He didn't move. Surrey stared. Her eyes flicked to the fabric. The smell must have hit her then, because she lowered her head, crouched, and began to walk, not like a wildcat, but like someone returning home. She stopped a foot away. Sniffed the blanket. Then, she nuzzled into Daniel's chest. Everyone watching froze. She chirped once, low and breathy. He dropped to his knees. "I miss you too." She leaned into him, pressed her head under his chin the way she used to when it rained. She let out a slow, rattling sigh. Daniel gently ran the comb down her shoulder. Her purr returned. "She never purred here before," a biologist whispered. That night, Colton made a decision he never made before. He brought Daniel into the observation room and played back footage for him. Surrey, brushing herself. Surrey, watching mirrors. Surrey, dragging the corner of her blanket across the floor, then curling into it alone. "She's not normal," Colton said. "No," Daniel replied. "She's better than normal. She's loved. She knows how to be loved." A meeting was held. 3 options were presented: long-term sanctuary isolation, sedated relocation, experimental supervised coexistence, a human-animal integration protocol never before tested. No one wanted the third. Daniel stood and said, "If we can't find a place for creatures who learn love differently, what does that say about us?" There was silence. Then one hand raised. Then another. A decision was made. She would not be caged. She would not be killed. She would be studied, yes, but also lived with. Integrated. Observed in an environment designed to allow her identity, not erase it. Daniel would become her legal steward. And for the first time in history, a leopard who learned to be human would be given the chance to live between 2 worlds, not forced to choose. The morning they came was still and gray. Rain hadn't returned, but the sky looked bruised, a smear of dull lavender above the rooftops. Jude had barely slept. He'd curled on the couch with Mira pressed close to his side, her breathing shallow, her eyes fluttering as she dozed like a child after too many days awake. The apartment, once silent, had the air of a ticking clock. Not literal, but something waiting to happen. Something irreversible. The department official arrived exactly at 7:15 a.m. There was no siren, no drama. Just a government-issued van, its back door already open, with a padded crate inside that made Jude nauseous just looking at it. The woman who stepped out was young. Maybe 30. Brown skin, soft voice. She didn't wear a uniform. That somehow made it worse. More real. More final. "I'm Naomi," she said, quiet, respectful. "We spoke on the phone." Jude nodded. He hadn't expected her to be kind. He wanted to hate her, but she looked like someone who cried in private. "We're taking her to the reserve," Naomi continued. "Not a zoo. Not a cage. It's 3,000 acres of semi-wild terrain. No tourists. No collars. We have a team that works with animals like her, ones that were raised too close to humans. She won't be alone." He heard the words. He didn't believe them. Not really. Inside the apartment, Mira paced. She'd known. Somehow, her instincts had sharpened. She kept glancing at Jude's duffel bag, the leash she never needed, the spot under the table where she used to hide during storms. But today, she didn't hide. She stood tall. Waiting. Watching. He crouched in front of her, his hands trembling. "I'm not going to say goodbye," he whispered. "Because this isn't over." She touched his chin with her nose. That old, habitual nudge she gave when he stayed up too late. And then, she walked out the door on her own. Not dragged. Not forced. Just walked. The drive to the reserve was long. 6 hours. Naomi let Jude sit beside the crate. It wasn't locked. Mira didn't try to escape. She rested her head against the mesh, eyes closed, her breath fogging the tiny window. Halfway there, they stopped for gas. Jude bought 3 chocolate bars and a bottle of water. When he returned, Mira was staring at a girl across the lot. Maybe 8 or 9 years old. The girl froze, wide-eyed. Then slowly, she smiled. "Is that your pet?" she asked. Jude crouched beside the crate. "No," he said softly. "She's my sister." The reserve was beautiful in a raw, untamed way. Thick brushland, scattered acacia trees, a silver river curling through the valley. No fences in sight, only distant tracking cameras on solar poles. A small team of handlers stood waiting. 2 men. One older, one in his 20s. And a tall woman with weather-worn skin and wild hair braided down her back. "Her name stays the same," Jude said firmly, unloading her things. No one argued. As they opened the crate, Mira hesitated. For the first time since she was a cub, she looked unsure. She turned to Jude, slowly, one last time, and he stepped forward, resting his forehead gently to hers through the bars. "You'll know who you are," he whispered. "Even if no one else does." Then the gate opened, and she stepped into the wild. 3 months passed. Jude didn't speak about Mira. He didn't post videos, didn't talk to journalists. The world had begun to move on. The controversy, the outrage, the heartbreak, it all faded in the endless scroll of social media. But Jude wasn't waiting for approval anymore. He used what little savings he had and took a job repairing fences at a rehab center for illegally captured wildlife. The place was understaffed, overcrowded, but it had promise. On his second week there, he met a woman who had rescued 2 hyena pups from a fighting ring. She never asked about Mira. But one night, over tea and the sound of owls outside the staff cabin, she said, "Some animals forget. Some never do. Either way, they teach us how to stay human." 6 months. Later, he received a letter. Not an email. A real letter, with a smudged stamp and 3 pages of handwritten notes, from Naomi. She wrote of Myra's slow adjustment, her struggle with solitude, and her instinct to return to humans whenever handlers entered the zone. She wrote about her peculiar habits, lining her bed with leaves in neat spirals, waiting beside the gate at dawn, brushing her head against tree trunks in rhythmic circles. Then came the line that stole Jude's breath. 2 weeks ago, we found her grooming a younger leopard who'd been orphaned in a poaching incident. She's teaching him how to dig, how to stalk low in the grass. She shares her meat. She lets him sleep on her back. Naomi included a photograph. It wasn't high quality. A bit blurry. But Jude saw her, his Mira, sitting in the golden grass, her head high, eyes focused, while a scrawny, spotted cub tumbled at her side. Her ears were alert. Her body strong. Her posture, regal. And in that moment, Jude understood something profound. Mira hadn't been ruined by loving humans. She had simply learned to love in a way the wild could now hold. The video Jude eventually released was simple. No dramatic editing. No music. Just clips of her over the years, drinking from a mug, playing with a comb, curling up in a pile of laundry. Then fading into footage Naomi had sent, Mira bounding through the grass, her body lean and agile, the cub trailing behind her. Jude's voiceover was only one line. She wasn't trying to be human, she was showing us how to be more like her. What would you have done if she was yours? Let me know in the comments, because stories like this aren't just watched, they're felt. Not every bond is meant to be forever, but some are meant to change us. Sometimes the most human thing an animal can do is remind us what true kindness looks like, without conditions, without borders, and without ever needing words. Mira wasn't a pet. She wasn't a symbol. She was herself. And she taught the world.